Shalom and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this programme today we'll be discussing the current crisis facing British-Israeli relations and the crisis facing the Jewish community today. Well, welcome to the programme, and today's guest needs no introduction. He's a good friend of mine. He's a good friend of the Middle East Report and Revelation TV and to the Christian community. It's Steven Jaffe from Magen David Adom UK. Steven, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the Middle East Report today, all the way from North London. You've been a regular on this programme ever since this programme was launched back in May of 2011. And I'm so grateful for the work that you do in reaching out to the Christian community to show that support and solidarity, as well as giving me some fantastic Christian guests to have on this programme. So, kol hakavod to you, and thank you so much, and it's great to see you again.
Well, Simon, I'm delighted to be here, and thank you so much for the platform that you give to the Jewish community in the UK. As we're going to discuss in the programme, there's a deeply felt crisis in the UK Jewish community, and the fact that you as a Christian broadcaster and station are reaching out to the Jewish community to give us a platform to speak is something that I personally deeply appreciate. So thank you so much.
I wouldn't have the depth and the of the programme without you or without our Jewish friends on the programme. A wonderful contribution to the programme. Steven, you have just recently come back from visiting friends and family in Israel. Share with us your thoughts of where Israel is right now and what you experienced when you're out there. I know that you picked up a bit of a tan, so the weather must have been good.
Well, it was a very emotional trip. I've never been to Israel before when it was at war. So there was a lot of apprehension before we flew out there. And from landing till leaving, it was an emotional experience. There was a lot of resilience we saw in the Israeli population, but also a lot of hurt, a lot of trauma, and a lot of deep apprehension as to what the future lies. So it was very emotive. We saw the hostages in the central square in Tel Aviv, the families of the hostages. That was difficult. We managed to engage with some of the displaced Israelis in Tel Aviv that come from the northern border. And this is not reported on in our media, but there are tens of thousands of Israelis who are being displaced from their homes, either close to Gaza or close to the Lebanese border. And we were able to engage with them. Most of our time is meeting family. We're blessed with, I've got a brother-in-law out there, we've got cousins that we wanted to meet, and really just to stand with the Israelis, to be with them, to physically stand with them is a great, I think a great blessing, and I would encourage people to think about going. Obviously people need to consider the circumstances as to whether it's right, but I think when you arrive, with all that apprehension before you go, when you arrive and you go through Ben Gurion Airport, I felt a surge of positivity, because you're in a country which is united, which is very sadly at war. You pass all the posters of the hostages as you arrive in Ben Gurion Airport. We're coming from a country where even to show sympathy for Israeli hostages is to be considered beyond the pale. We're seeing posters of hostages torn down in the UK. To leave that behind you and to be in a country which is focused on that war, terribly sad, but there was a lifting of my spirits. Actually, the Israelis encouraged us, and this is a question that I was asked again and again by family and by other Israelis: what's it like in London? They're concerned about the Jewish community in the UK. They've seen the broadcasts of the huge marches here, of the instances of anti-Semitism rising. Israelis are speaking to us with tremendous concern about our well-being and welfare as a diaspora community.
Which is quite incredible, isn't it, when you think about it? And having visited Israel back in the end of January, early February, I didn't want to come back, to be honest. I think Israel, despite the fact that Israel's at war, is in a great place. The nation is united, it's resolved. But the impression you get when you're there, which is incredible, like you said, Israel cares more about getting hostages home than actually defeating Hamas in Gaza. And I think that says so much about Israel as a nation, that they're not conducting this war against Hamas for retribution. They're doing it as a war for survival, to really bring the hostages home and to assure that something like October the 7th doesn't ever happen again. But share with us your thoughts of how the events of October the 7th, and we're nearly approaching the 6-month anniversary of that horrific event that occurred on October the 7th that changed everything. The biggest mass terrorist attack in Israel's history by Hamas, the largest number of Jewish people killed since the Holocaust over 80 years ago. And when you're there and you're in the south of Israel, you then see the sheer magnitude of what happened that day. So just share with us how this has caused a lot of trauma for your family and friends in the aftermath of October the 7th.
Well, I came onto the programme, it was a live broadcast days after the attack.
With Selmy Unsdorfer, yeah.
Correct, yes. And we were both in deep trauma. And I know this is shared by our Christian supporters as well. The sheer magnitude of what happened was just sinking in. As I think I explained at that programme, because it was holiday period, the news coming out of Israel was gradual, and it took a while for us to understand the sheer magnitude of the attack. The numbers that you mentioned, the most Jews murdered in a day since the operation of Auschwitz and Treblinka. It was just hard to get our minds around that. I think we're now 6 months on, the deep trauma is still there because so many of the hostages are still held. These are elderly people, these are children, these are ordinary people who are in immense danger, and their families are in deep trauma, and that is ongoing. And I think we would have all hoped, dreamt and prayed that those hostages would have been released by now, that they would, I'm sure we all prayed for an Entebbe kind of incident that the Israelis would have been able to rescue. That hasn't happened. That's a deep disappointment and a trauma. And I think you're right, it says everything about Israel, that the determination is really to bring those hostages home. And that's an aspect, again, which our media in this country would prefer not to focus on. The cry that we often hear for ceasefire is often regardless of the fact that there are Israeli hostages still held in Gaza, and their release must be absolutely paramount for anyone who has a humanitarian instinct.
Absolutely. So let's have a look now, this remarkable video that's produced by the Israeli Foreign Ministry entitled The Resilience of the Israeli People. And this is how Israel is rebuilding her nation after the horrors of October 7th, almost 6 months on from that deadly terrorist attack.
Visitors from around the world have seen Hamas's October 7th massacre's destruction in southern Israel. The lucky ones have also witnessed that region's resilience and renewal. Farmers continue to work the soil and tend livestock.
To be a farmer, it's not a walk, it's a way of life. Everything that is damaged, we can build again and better. A lot of volunteers coming from all Israel. That's the beauty of Israel. We begin picking the avocado, put the wheat, plant the potatoes. This is my land, this is who I am, nobody breaks us.
This determination can be also felt in towns such as Sderot, where Hamas murdered 30 residents.
The pioneers that came here and settled down, nothing was here. Today we are 35,000 citizens. In the 90s, we were half. The magic of this place is the community.
Hospitals, which treated unprecedented terror casualty rates, remain strong despite being hit by missiles.
On the 7th of October, in our emergency room, we had Israeli Jewish doctors working, We had Israeli Arab Muslim doctors, and we had 7 Palestinian trainees. Here, within the first few hours, more than 220 injured arrived. Don't know many hospitals in the world that dealt with such a huge amount of injuries within such a short amount of time. I have any problem, not with blood, not with medication, and not with the spirit of the people.
At Kibbutz Re'im, a memorial display was set up where the Nova Festival massacre took place.
We are in the Re'im forest. It's the place where the Nova Party, Nova Festival, place of fun and freedom and peace. Hundreds of people get murdered, young people.
The survivors are among those showing the way forward, committed to dancing again. Civilians are determined to rebuild. Israel will remain prosperous and resilient.
And that shows you the resilience of the Israeli people, the people that I love and the people that I cherish, rebuilding after the horrors of October the 7th, almost 6 months on to the day. Stephen, you're also here to represent the incredible organisation that is Magen David Adom UK, that do an incredible job as Israel's national ambulance service and saving lives in Israel. Share with us the impact October the 7th has had on MDA.
Well, it was one of the darkest days of the organisation. We had paramedics murdered, 13 paramedics murdered that day, over I think it was 20 ambulances destroyed, and traumatic as well. You had people in the dispatch centre at Tel Aviv, very young staff by the way, and they're speaking directly to other paramedics or other people who were whose lives were in immense danger because they were ringing up from areas that had been overrun by Hamas, and the dispatch staff were speaking directly to them with Hamas terrorists milling around the people they were talking to, and very often the people they were talking to were murdered. So you can imagine the deep trauma that left the organisation. What I can say is that thanks to the tremendously generous response which came from the Jewish community and well beyond the Jewish community, including our wonderful Christian Friends group, that Magen David Adom got back on its feet very, very quickly from a severe battering that it took on that day. And the statistics are absolutely amazing in terms of the ambulances that have been donated from this country. They were flying them in from the United States, new ambulances, not just replacing those that have been destroyed, but ratcheting up MDA's capacity, because MDA has to be ready for the next crisis. And you know, we know that if war breaks out with Hezbollah, the impact of that on Israeli society is going to be huge, and Magen David Adom has to be ready. So a huge thank you to viewers who I know responded in a tremendously generous fashion. And it has been, from that day, October the 7th to today, Magen David Adom is on full-scale alert, 24/7. Every ambulance, every medical vehicle is manned 24 hours a day, ready to respond to any incident. That comes at an enormous human cost. People without leave, unable to take annual leave, having extended shift hours, and also an enormous financial cost. And thanks to the help coming from overseas, Magen David Adom is back on its feet, and it's ratcheting itself up in terms of its supplies and resources to meet the next crisis, and we need that support.
And the new ambulances that are needed that are bulletproof.
Armoured proof ambulances, that says everything, doesn't it? Because
Absolutely.
they are targeted by Hamas, and also protective gear for the paramedics. It's so important. That's a core element of MDA UK's appeal that we launched over the Easter holiday for our Christian supporters. That'll be over the Passover appeal for our Jewish supporters. And this coming together of Jews and Christians in practical support for Israel through the work of Magen David Adom is saving lives. And I am truly honoured to be able to say thank you to everyone who has supported us.
Wonderful. So let's have a look now at this incredibly moving news report put together by friends at MDA UK. This features Daniel Berger, the CEO of MDA UK, as well as Rob Rinder, a celebrity visiting the call-out centre of MDA in Israel, and their stories of what happened on October the 7th.
So where are we, Daniel?
So we are at the MDA Ashdod station, which is the headquarters of the Lachish region. And here is a regional national dispatch center.
My name is Sharon Temis. I'm 25 years old. I'm a dispatch center shift supervisor and in charge of all the ambulances in the region.
My name is Adil Ugassi. I'm 24 at the end of this month. So I'm a dispatcher in Lachish region and I'm also the head of the shift in my shift. This is the dispatch.
Shalom.
Hi there. Hello.
Shalom. Incredible.
We are an independent organization of the ambulance service and we have a lot of volunteers that are a crucial part of this organization.
Just kind of mind-boggling to think that this room with all of its technology and all of the incredibly trained staff is part of a global charity, mostly a voluntary organization.
Yes.
Can you see that's a big surprise to me, right?
The mission of Magen David Adom is to help as many people that they can. We want to be the face that they see the minute that the ambulance comes, to know that we're here to help.
I'm going to take you back. On October the 7th, were you just coming into work that day?
So no. Actually, on October 7th, I was supposed to be on a plane to Rome. I woke up at 6:30 a.m. to red alerts across all over the country. Here is where you can see all the calls that are being accepted, okay? So red flag, it means a very urgent situation that needs an ICU, and you could see thousands of red flags, thousands of urgent cases, thousands of cases that we couldn't even reach. The feeling I had on October 7th is you could hear the silence, but it was loud. People were calling, you could hear the screamings on the phone, you could hear the gunshots. There are terrorists, thousands of terrorists, walking between houses and shooting people.
You must have had a conversation with somebody on that day that helps us understand, to get a sense of what it's like to do your job.
One of the calls was from a teen boy that called and said that all of his family was murdered and he was hiding under the bed, and begged us to come and save him. It was hard to hear.
What did you say to him on the phone?
I said to him that he's stronger than he thinks and that he has to live for them and he has to save himself, and we will come as soon as possible, and that he's a hero. Magen David Adom has lost people in the field. We've lost paramedics, volunteers, and still we didn't stop. I think this is what humanity looks like, and this is why this is so important to have systems like this and advanced systems, because every improvement improves our help to others.
Adi, tell me, you were here on that fateful morning on the 7th of October.
Yes.
How are you now?
I saw that day stuff that I wish I could take back. There were areas that MDA ambulances could not have reached because the terrorists were in there. So all we could do was try to help them through the phone, guide them, do whatever you need to do to keep yourself safe. I found out that another policeman had died, and actually 5 minutes afterwards the police stations asked an ambulance to come and treat terrorists. It's not fair for us to have to bury another one that we love because of these terrorists and those people that chose violence. We are here to save lives and they're here to destroy it.
Tell us, are there things that you think MADA should be doing or are doing?
I think that it's also important to try to keep our mental health also treated. We're leaning on each other to help, to support. and to get it out of your system so you can move on.
Thank you for everything you do.
Thank you.
My message to the people who think about supporting the MDA, the people in the UK, is that Magen David Adom is the organization that represents humanity, not only in this country, but in the whole world.
I want to assure you that we're doing everything for the Israeli people. We do everything for our neighbors, friends, families, everyone who needs us. Am Yisrael Chai.
And it was amazing to hear those MDA staff members and hear their extraordinary stories on October the 7th at the MDA UK annual dinner, which was at the tail end of last year. Incredibly remarkable people. What they had to endure on October the 7th is just absolutely unbelievable, and it just shows you what incredible people who work for MDA in saving lives in Israel. And Stephen, how has the war in which Israel's waging against Hamas in Gaza impacted MDA and also, the Jewish community here in the UK as it relates to MDA?
So as regards MDA, as well as the ambulance service, which people who visited Israel will be very familiar with, perhaps less well known is that it's responsible for 90% of Israel's blood supply. So it's processing blood, 90% of it. And so when there's conflict, when there's war, and particularly on the 7th of October, there was a huge surge in demand for blood. They have recently made an appeal again for increase of blood supply. So there's an enormous challenge there due to the ongoing conflict, sadly injured people that need treatment. So it's ongoing, the crisis. And as I've said, MDA always has to be ready for the next crisis, and that requires, if war does break out with Hezbollah, that will impact hugely on Israel's society generally. Regarding the Jewish community here in the UK and its relationship with Israel and MDA, I think alongside its Christian friends, it's been outstandingly generous and open-handed in its support for Israel. Prior to, we forget that immediately prior to the war, we were very divided. Israel was a very divided society politically between the left and the right, all the issues regarding judicial reforms. The Jewish community here in the UK likes to play its part in Israeli politics. It feels as if it's somehow part of that. It isn't really, if I'm being honest, but we were taking sides on that and we were divided. I think what Hamas achieved wasn't what they set out to do, was to create a unity and a sense of purpose within the Jewish world. We need Israel and we can't take Israel for granted, I think was the message that the Jewish community here in the UK took. And Magen David Adom, like many other organisations, was a platform which enabled the Jewish community to show its support in practical terms. I think there are a lot of people who perhaps in the past were not really upfront about their Jewish identity. I'm thinking of a celebrity like Stephen Fry, for example, who chose to devote his a Christmas presentation that he was asked to give by Channel 4. He chose to give it on the subject of the increase in AntiSemitism and how that impacted on him as coming from a family of Holocaust survivors. So there was an example of somebody whose Jewish sensitivities and identity was, I think, intensified by the conflict in the Middle East and its impact here in the UK with the enormous surge of anti-Semitic incidents, the Jewish community feeling very, very apprehensive. A guy like Stephen Fry felt the need to respond to it, and I think that was, symbolic of a greater sense within the Jewish community generally.
Yeah. And of course, David Baddiel as well, his book on anti-Semitism and speaking out on this subject as well as the incredible Rachel Riley using their celebrity status to raise awareness on Jew hatred. I think she's been amazing.
Which is an amazingly brave thing to do, because all of these celebrities, they don't have to. They could get away with sitting on the fence like many do, yet by putting their names forward in social media, they're exposing themselves to torrents of abuse which they receive, and all praise to them for what they're doing.
Yeah, and Stephen, when we look at the conflict in Israel, particularly Israel's war against Hamas, we couldn't get a starker contrast, could we, with the work of MDA in Israel to save lives, Jewish and also Arab lives in Israel, and how the MDA during October the 7th, the ambulance staff literally drove into that conflict zone when Hamas were taking hostages, raping, murdering in the most vile way those southern communities in Israel. And you compare that to Hamas in Gaza using the Shifa hospital as an operation base to actually hide behind patients that are unwell, but also hiding behind medical staff as well, and putting them in harm's way by having their headquarters at the Shifa hospital in Gaza. Just share with us the contrast really between MDA and that of the Israelis and that of their enemy Hamas.
So Hamas have always made it very clear, we love death, they say, notwithstanding that their leadership is surviving this war by hiding in tunnels. They claim to love death, but interestingly, their leadership is exposing others to death and not themselves. But there's a contrasting worldview, isn't it? In Israel, the focus is on saving the lives of the hostages. Hamas regard the civilian casualties on their own side as being their major weapon, because they know that this will play out in a receptive media, like so much of the British media, who will quote endlessly the Hamas figures, not ask questions as to how many of the casualties are Hamas fighters, how many are civilians. Our media doesn't ask that question. It just is happy to quote Hamas figures. So you have an organisation which believes the death of its own citizens is its strongest weapon. This is something which is very difficult for us to get our heads around, and I don't think many people in the West can get their heads around that, feel very comfortable in blaming Israel for the horrendous consequences of war, and don't think, well, in whose interests is it to promote the casualty of civilians? It's Hamas. That is their worldview, that martyrdom of their own citizens, as they see it, is a virtue on their score, not for themselves, not for their own leaders who are in Qatar, many of them sitting on billions of dollars in their private bank accounts. They don't see death for themselves, but they're happy to see that for their Palestinian people. And this puts Israel in a very, very difficult situation. They have tried beyond any other military in the similar situation of fighting in urban situations, fighting an enemy that's had years to prepare for this, in terms of booby-trapping buildings, in terms of tunnels, assault tunnels. Israel has found itself in an unprecedented complex scenario in the war it's had to fight, and yet it has, in terms of telephoning people, in warning them, in evacuating civilians, in texting messages, done more. And this is, coming from commanders of the British Army who have acknowledged that Israel has done more. A man like Colonel Kemp, who's commanded British forces in Afghanistan, has said that what Israel has done in Gaza is unprecedented in trying to minimize civilian casualties. I'm not in any way saying that what the consequences of war isn't horrendous. Absolutely it is, but this is a war that Israel didn't start, didn't want, and wasn't prepared for. And I think people need to bear that in mind when it becomes very easy for them to level criticism against Israel.
Because it suits Hamas's narrative, and it suits the story to say that Israel's attacking a hospital, without actually putting it in context that Hamas are actually using this hospital and knowing that they can have a huge propaganda tool by basing their headquarters in the hospital, surrounding themselves with ill patients as human shields, as well as medical staff as human shields, and to conduct their operations from a hospital. It just shows you the absolute level of care that they actually show towards their fellow citizens in Gaza, using them as human shields and allowing Israel to, knowing that they have to destroy their stronghold in Shifa Hospital in order to clear out Hamas terrorists. I think that shows you everything about the humanity that is Hamas, and that's why it's so important that we show you this excellent video, courtesy of our friends at the IDF, that show the battle and the intensity of the battle to actually defeat Hamas at the Shifa Hospital in Gaza City.
Shifa, hospital or terrorist hub? The largest hospital in Gaza, the Shifa Hospital, was taken over as a Hamas command and control center, shielding themselves behind patients and medical teams. Based on new intelligence that Hamas and Islamic Jihad had returned to the Shifa Hospital, a precise IDF operation was started, before which troops were instructed on operating cautiously, to take all measures necessary in order to avoid harm to patients, civilians, medical teams, and medical equipment. During the 2-week operation, our forces arrested 500 terrorists and eliminated hundreds of Hamas and Islamic Jihad operatives, having also located a large amount of weapons and armament, a number of which were hidden in the MRI complex and maternity ward. While operating, the IDF simultaneously coordinated and supplied the entry of fuel and humanitarian aid to the hospital in partnership with Kogan. Over 10,000 units of medication, hundreds of pain relievers, bandages, and infusions, and approximately 2 tons of food and 3 tons of water were brought in, along with the medical equipment. As Hamas terrorists hide behind the patients of Shifa, putting them at risk, the IDF puts its soldiers at risk to deliver aid to the patients. Hamas will stop at nothing to perpetuate acts of terrorism, even if it means hiding behind the sick and wounded.
And those videos are so important because you won't see them on the mainstream media, and it's imperative that we tell Israel's narrative and what Israeli soldiers have to face when they're fighting in Gaza against the genocidal terrorist organisation that is Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Stephen, on to talking about British-Israeli relations. We started off over 6 months ago with this Conservative government being such strong supporters of Israel. We saw that Boris Johnson was a strong friend of Israel. That was then followed through with Rishi Sunak. We had James Cleverly as our Foreign Secretary, came out after the horrors of October the 7th and spoke passionately about Israel. He visited Israel, saw the devastation caused by Hamas on October the 7th. But since David Cameron has been our new Foreign Secretary, there seems to be a huge shift in British foreign policy away from supporting Israel to a more hostile position, and he's been calling for an immediate ceasefire. He's been calling for, again, the 2-state solution, but also threatening Israel with an arms embargo if Israel doesn't halt military operations against Hamas near the Rafah crossing. Your thoughts?
So I'm speaking in a personal capacity. Yes, and I think this is part of a process that we see beyond the UK as well. The United States government as well has made similar transition and noises. I think the two go together. The UK is not as an important player so far as Israel is concerned in comparison to the United States. So that is even more concerning what's going on in America. Also, I think you see, a resurgence of kind of the established Foreign Office positions that we've had in this country for many, many years, reasserting itself under David Cameron. There are over 20 ambassadors to Arab countries and 1 ambassador to Israel. So there has always been I would say, speaking personally, a tendency towards an Arab position regarding Israel. I have no doubt that this government opposes Hamas, but if it wants Israel to come to a ceasefire, then it has to have an alternative that is going to see, firstly, the hostages returned to Israel, and secondly, a situation where Hamas can never again threaten Israeli citizens, that it's not in a position to restore its authority in Gaza, to recruit in Gaza, to arm itself in Gaza. And Lord Cameron has to explain, if there's an immediate ceasefire, how are these things going to be achieved? And, that's up to him to convince people of, and I don't believe he's even begun to state a coherent alternative for Israel. So that is my personal perspective.
Yeah, well, thank you for conveying your personal opinion. And also, we see that this week our former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has been in Israel, visiting the sites that were attacked on October the 7th and meeting the victims of the the survivors of the Nova Music Festival. And of course, this is the site of the horrendous massacre that took place there. She said that, that she has publicly criticised the British government for backsliding on its support for Israel, and also for the Foreign Office for allowing a pro-Palestinian prevailing view to take hold. Israel needs more people like her, don't we, to actually speak up, to visit Israel, to show solidarity. And she's done so much when she was Home Secretary, to do all she could to protect the Jewish community.
Well, we are blessed with good friends in Parliament. There's a lot of hostility there as well, but there are individuals who have spoken out very, very bravely, politicians, media people. The prevailing atmosphere in the UK is one of hostility towards Israel and growing. I've seen polling that indicates that about a quarter of British people can't answer the question whether Hamas is a terrorist organisation, that they don't know. Thankfully, the numbers who refute that, who say that Hamas isn't, is small, but you're talking about maybe 4% of the British population. Well, that translates to about 2 million people. So, this is a hostile environment, and we're grateful to those political leaders who are sticking with Israel. There is no doubt that they are facing pressure at a constituency level, and that's why it's so important that we, as friends of Israel, are speaking out, are giving encouragement to those politicians like Suella Braverman and others, some of them from the Labour Party. I don't want to make this party political.
Absolutely.
Those who are standing with Israel need to be encouraged and supported, and we need to be vociferous in doing that.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the big news story coming out of Israel this week? Sadly, the tragic death of 3 British aid workers who work for the World Central Kitchen, who were hit by an IDF drone this week.
Look, Simon, I'm here to represent an organisation, Magen David Adom, that puts its staff and volunteers in dangerous situations. So my heart goes out to the families of those people, to the organisation. I think an absolute tragedy. Israel investigated and was quick to accept responsibility. What is crucial to bear in mind is that there is no intention on Israel's part to kill those people. It was a mistake, and a tragic mistake, and one which I know Israel deeply, deeply regrets. And as a spokesman, as I've said, for Magen David Adom, which also puts its staff and volunteers in very dangerous positions, my heart goes out to the organisation and the families involved.
So let's listen now to the IDF spokesman talking about this tragic event that occurred this week when an Israeli drone hit a convoy of aid workers who were supplying food for the residents of Gaza.
This morning, the IDF Chief of Staff addressed the tragedy that took the lives of a team of international workers from World Central Kitchen as they returned from an aid delivery in Gaza.
I want to be very clear. The strike was not carried out with the intention of harming WCK aid workers. This incident was a grave mistake. Israel is at a war with Hamas, not with the people of Gaza. We are sorry for the unintentional harm to the members of WCK.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu personally spoke with some of the leaders of the countries the victims were from.
This happens in war. We're checking this thoroughly. We're in touch with the governments, and we will do everything for this not to happen again.
In the U.S., the White House is expressing outrage over how dangerous it is for aid workers in Gaza.
More than 200 aid workers have been killed in this conflict, making it one of the worst for aid workers in recent history. This incident is emblematic of a larger problem and evidence of why distribution of aid in Gaza has been so challenging.
Meanwhile, the Israeli military continues to prepare for its controversial invasion of Rafah, Hamas's last stronghold, but also temporary home to more than 1 million Gazan refugees. While the Biden administration opposes the invasion, former Vice President Mike Pence says it's a necessity.
Israel has no choice but to invade Rafah and hunt down and destroy Hamas once and for all.
Rather than criticize Israel, Pence said Americans should fully support its war efforts against enemies sworn to wipe it off the map.
If the Palestinians laid down their weapons right now and released all hostages, we'd have peace. But if Israelis laid down their weapons, we'd have no Israel.
On another front, Israel is bracing for Iran retaliating after a top Iranian general and his aide were killed by a missile strike in Syria that's being blamed on Israelis. But Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant warns whoever hits Israel will pay a heavy price.
Last night, an incident took place in Gaza that resulted in the tragic death of World Central Kitchen employees as they fulfilled their vital mission of bringing food to people in need. As a professional military committed to international law, we are committed to examining our operations thoroughly and transparently. I just spoke to WCK founder, Chef Jose Anders, and expressed the deepest condolences of Israel Defense Forces to the families and the entire World Central Kitchen family. We also express sincere sorrow to our allied nations who have been doing and continue to do so much to assist those in need. We have been reviewing the incident in the highest levels to understand the circumstances of what happened and how it happened. We will be opening a probe to examine this serious incident further. This will help us reduce the risk of such an event from occurring again. The incident will be investigated in the fact-finding and assessment mechanism, an independent professional and expert body. For the last few months, the IDF has been working closely with the World Central Kitchen to assist them in fulfilling their noble mission of helping bring food and humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza. WCK also came to help Israelis after the massacre of October 7th. They were one of the first NGOs here. The work of WCK is critical. They are the front lines of humanity. We will get to the bottom of this and we will share our findings transparently.
And our hearts and our prayers go out to the family of those British aid workers and other international aid workers that were sadly killed by this mistaken identity by the IDF in Gaza, and our prayers for the World Central Kitchen and the incredible work they do and the humanitarian work that they do in Gaza, but also in Israel in the aftermath of October the 7th. I want to just bring something else regarding this. This, sadly, when this news story broke in the middle of the week that an Israeli drone had killed, sadly, 3 British aid workers, has now caused a crisis in the Anglo-Israeli relationship, to the extent now that many people that are hostile to Israel will use this as an excuse. I've already seen articles even in Telegraph saying how the British government should actually suspend military aid to Israel. They want to use this to halt Israel's military operations in Gaza, and it's been used now as a political weapon. That is not the way to handle this situation, is it?
Well, I think it's inevitable that people will try to use this. I think what you say is correct, Simon. You have to look at the intention here, and there was no intention. It was not in Israel's interest, quite clearly. And sadly, we have to look at what happens in war and mistakes and the horrific consequences of those mistakes. It's not just the Israeli army that have made mistakes. This is kind of universal in warfare, and let's see what the Israeli investigation reveals. But yes, people are jumping on a bandwagon. But let's be honest about this, Simon. They were calling for a ceasefire on the day after the 7th of October massacres. Certain elements of this so-called ceasefire now movement. That was a demand that they were making in the immediate aftermath of the atrocities. So that's not a new call they're making, but they will latch on to this incident, of course. And of course, people are emotionally impacted by the death of aid workers, and that is quite right and justifiable. But I agree with you. I think the way that this will be used by certain people is disingenuous and counterproductive.
Absolutely. So 6 months on from the horrific October the 7th attacks, Stephen, what impact has this had on your community? Because according to the Community Security Trust, recorded instances of anti-Semitism are all-time high. Almost doubled in the amount of reported instances. You can't open a newspaper today without seeing 3 or 4 stories that are full of anti-Semitic hatred towards your community. We also have the massive Palestinian hate marches as well, with many government advisors warning that London on a Saturday is a no-go zone for Jewish people. And to be Jewish during this time, living in this country, quite frankly, is really frightening. So how are you and how are your community bearing up on this unbelievable pressure being placed on your community?
So you're quite right, Simon. Alongside the trauma of what we're witnessing in Israel, domestically, the Jewish community feels extremely apprehensive about its own future here in the UK. It tends to be that there's periods of crisis, and we've been through it in the past. When Corbyn was close to becoming Prime Minister, we feared in 2019 there was a period of crisis. Then previous conflicts that Israel's been involved in, you always see a spike in anti-Semitism, but what tends to happen is that the incidents of anti-Semitism then plateau at that higher level. They don't go down again, so each crisis is progressively worse and worse and worse. So the community feels under threat. I think the best way I can illustrate this is that the chair of governors of an organisation called the Jewish Leadership Council, which is an establishment community organisation, has said that we, the Jewish community in the UK, is in the battle of our lives in terms of preserving the community here and defending our place in British society. We have in many respects a thriving Jewish community here that's contributing enormously to wider British society, but it feels all of this is under threat, and that this is coming from very much the establishment leadership of the community. It's not coming from a kind of an activist element that's trying to whip things up. It's coming from a community leadership which often tries to dampen things down. So if he is saying that we are in a period of unprecedented crisis, then I think we all have to take notice. And I know that for our Christian friends are going through similar trauma, because as friends of Israel, they are also under immense pressure and attack in this country. If we lose this battle and Israel is perceived as being an apartheid, racist, Nazi, terror state, that makes you and me friends of apartheid, friends of terror, friends of Nazis, and that will have an enormous consequence on us here in the UK. So the Jewish community, together with our Christian friends, must stand together and fight this, because this is a battle for all of us. And I know the audience will get it when I say that first they came for the Jews, but it didn't stop by being against the Jews. And I think this is about your right to believe in what you believe, your right to worship the way you want to worship. This is all coming under attack in an increasingly vocal and intensified way. So it's a very, very, I think, significant moment for the history of this country, never mind just the history of the Jewish community.
Absolutely, Steve. And how much was it a game changer having the Palestinian protest, that vote on a ceasefire, how Parliament can actually have a vote on whether Israel should have a ceasefire or not is ridiculous, because quite frankly, it's up to the Israeli government and the IDF to decide whether they have a ceasefire, with no mention at all of the hostages. But to have actually the heart of our democracy, which is Westminster, the House of Commons on Big Ben, to have lit up in writing, Palestine will be free from the river to the sea, which is an incitement to genocide, broadcast on our national parliament, the mother of parliaments around the world. That must have been very shocking. How was that received amongst
well,
your
frightening,
community.
absolutely frightening, and it should be frightening to everyone when the Parliament Speaker says he allowed the debate because he was scared for the safety of MPs. That was his comment. I think that shows us that democracy is under challenge and under threat, that there are forces in this country from the far left, from the Islamists, that wish to attack our democracy. And as I've said, this is a challenging moment for the nation. And isn't it amazing and remarkable that that little country in the Middle East is at the heart of this? But for those of us who read the Bible are not altogether surprised that Jerusalem, the great stumbling block to the nations, and I think that's what we are witnessing in our day. How else can we come to understand how this conflict in the Middle East can bring hundreds of thousands onto the streets of London, and yet there is, silence on a war between Azerbaijan and Armenia, Absolutely. On human rights in China, in these people who are calling for a ceasefire on the one hand, are encouraging the Houthis of Yemen to attack merchant shipping in the same breath. This is not a peace movement. The organisers of those protests come from organisations like Friends of Al-Aqsa, the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, who have never called for peace between Israel and the Palestinians, because they don't want peace between Israelis and Palestinians. They want the eradication of Israel. And many people who attend those protests may say, well, we're not supporters of Hamas. We are generally concerned about humanitarian considerations. But to march alongside people who come up with from the river to the sea, meaning the eradication of Israel, who chant support for the Houthis, if that is, humanitarian, progressive people marching alongside them, well, frankly, that is not on. And that is a hugely concerning aspect of British society today.
Stephen, this could play out in two ways, doesn't it? It also depends on Israel destroying Hamas, because if Israel destroys Hamas, then it destroys part of that ideology that not only wants to destroy Israel, but also wants to destroy this country and the West. But also, where is the political will to confront this? Where are the police actually dealing with these hate marches and arresting those that are inciting hatred and inciting genocide, where they don't even think that a Nazi swastika is offensive, and someone wearing a Nazi swastika or waving it at Israel is causing offence? It's almost as if our nation and our political leaders have completely lost their moral clarity and their moral bearings, and there is none.
Well, we've even seen them arresting a man with a placard saying Hamas are terrorists, and he got arrested, and the people who were physically attacking him were not confronted by the police. That shows you the level of, as you say, the lack of clarity in terms of their instructions, in terms of the law, in terms of a moral sense as to what is right and wrong. And we're hitting, I think, on the very substance of the crisis, not just impacting the Jewish community of this country, but this country generally. And I think you said how this will play out. Well, it's up to us, Simon, isn't it? It's up Absolutely. To us as Jews, as Christians, people of no faith and every faith, to stand up to this, because this is our calling in our country today.
Yeah. Sadly, I have to ask this question, which is a very important question, and this question was asked 10 years ago in light of the ISIS terrorist attacks across Europe. And the question asked by the then Prime Minister and Prime Minister now, does European Jewry have a future? But the same question can be asked of the British Jewish community, because you can't continue with this level of hatred being directed against your community, having your schools almost like being barricaded up, having to provide extra money for security, Jewish celebrities and politicians facing death threats. The whole situation can't continue as it is. So is there a future for British Jewry in this country?
Well, I'd like to think so. I think so, because that goes to the heart of Britain as a nation as much as it does for the future of the Jewish community. We recently had the festival of Purim, and those who will have read the Book of Esther will understand the point. What's said to Queen Esther, if you don't intervene with the king, the Jews will still be saved. but you and your family will be forgotten. And I think that is the challenge of our time. I can't tell you about the future of the British Jewish community, but I can tell you Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel will live, wherever that will be. Our history has been one of movement. We've had to, the German Jewish community was very settled, very patriotic, and we saw what happened to them in the 1930s. We're not at that stage yet here in the UK. There is the Jewish antenna is up. It's very sensitive to the growth of anti-Semitism. There is deep concern. But I have faith in my British neighbours and colleagues, and I don't think that's an ill-placed faith. It is a battle, but I think there is a growing awareness in British society that this is about the nation and its future. So I'm not prepared to give up yet, but I know that there are many Jewish people who are talking along those lines. Do we have a future? And the rates of aliyah, of emigrating to Israel, is up from other parts of the world, in particular France, where the Jewish community is bigger than the UK. We've seen increasing aliyah there. The American Jewish community is for the first time addressing these issues themselves. In the United States, where there is such a large Jewish community, that they themselves are asking this question, do we have a future? So yes, critical times, Simon, and it's a sad question, but I'm glad you brought it up.
And Stephen, what role can our Christian viewers watching this programme today play in showing support, not only to Israel during this time of war and conflict against Hamas in Gaza, where it almost feels like the entire Western world is against Israel at the moment, but also stand in solidarity with our precious Jewish friends like yourself, and also the Jewish community facing this hatred that's been directed against them?
Well, I'm so encouraged by travelling up and down the country, speaking in churches, speaking to church leaders, and knowing about local initiatives where Christians have engaged with their local Jewish communities and making a real difference. So viewers can make a real difference. Get involved with your Christian ministries, whether it's International Christian Embassy of Jerusalem, Christian Friends of Israel, Christians United for Israel, Christians Action Against Anti-Semitism. They're out there, they're doing great work. Show your support to those organisations.
Amen. And thank you so much for being my special guest for today, Stephen. Absolute pleasure. I want to thank you for watching this programme today, particularly as we mark the 6-month anniversary of the horrific events of October the 7th. Our Jewish community is besieged right now with a level of hatred directed against them that we have never seen before. And as Christians, we can't afford to be silent at this time. We need to show our love and support not only for the nation of Israel, but also for our precious Jewish community. So thank you for watching this week's edition of the Middle East Report.